I am James Armitage. I am the manager of cybersecurity for the City of Vancouver. That covers layers 1 through 7, as well as all of our cloud operations as well. I have to get through this part. I do have to have a disclaimer. Public sector, this is not an official endorsement. The opinions, the mistakes, these are all mine. But I'm very pleased to be able to share with you some of the things that we're learning on our cloud security journey. One of the big questions I get all the time is, hey, am I going to be more secure in the cloud? And that comes from all layers of the organization, both within and without. And it really depends. There are some quick wins. You can absolutely prototype things far more quickly. Jordy has touched on the marketplace. One of the biggest challenges of selecting products and going through that exercise is actually installing them, getting them up and running on premise, working with multiple teams to get my VMs provisioned, all my other stakeholders involved. This is actually a one-click deployment option to start kicking the tires on things and seeing if it's fit for purpose before we invest too much more time. So we can iterate through a lot more things, and we can get a lot more creative with the technologies we're evaluating and where we can go. Change management in the cloud is just so much easier than on-premise. Jordy has talked about how everything has a cloud trail behind it, that you can put CloudWatch on it. Change is simple to track and monitor and log. That is absolutely critical because so many security incidents are often change incidents that just went a little bit sideways. Not every security incident is you're being attacked from the outside. Often someone has figured something on the inside. Segmentation. If I proposed to segment workloads by data center on premise, I would have a big problem. If I said, hey, we'll just build a new data center over here for this application and another one over there for that, that would not go down very well. If I proposed destroying a data center because I didn't like it anymore, the general $15 million a data center thing on a small scale doesn't go very well for me. Segmentation in the cloud is simple. Data centers are free. Routers are free. This is a really new paradigm. It's a little brain bending compared to your typical approach on cloud. I'd like to present a slightly different take on the shared responsibility model. It's not exactly the same here, but this is actually a different take on the shared responsibility model. Slightly different view, not exactly a one-to-one approach. There's a lot in there to unpack. And within this, there's a lot that is actually really a security solution in here. So the security and compliance, that whole section there, those are all elements of your security shared responsibility model. There is the security marketplace. I've touched on that. There's everything from your training, your governance, and we've touched on identity federation and direct connect. I would present to you, this might be a way of thinking about security as a shared responsibility model in a little more granular detail. Now, logging. Logging is really important to me. Logging is more than just security. You get IT operations data, you get business intelligence. Logging is the lifeblood of a lot of organizations. And I've been to a lot of places, and generally the logging environment I find is some scattered pieces of driftwood in varying condition of repair. It's not great. And then once you come into Amazon, you find I can log everything. VPC flow logs, there's all sorts of stuff. Some of the things you aren't going to find, though, your layers 1 through 3 have vanished on you. Everything is now basically layer 4 and up. You can go out of your way to try and put traditional logging and packet capture in, but you're going to get into some really interesting constructs around how you actually do that between your different virtual services. All right, so I'm just trying to frame this up. One of the entry points that you want to think about for security is putting security in a business context. I am a technical security practitioner, but that doesn't actually matter if I can't sell it back into the business and explain the business value of security. Otherwise, it really comes off looking as security for security's sake, and that doesn't do a very good job. So there's 3 just different angles I'd like to approach this from. One is financial, another is your architectural design, and then finally our legal requirements. Those are really good discussions to start having. Cloud is new to so many organizations. If you are in the security space, you probably are going to get pulled into discussions that you've never had before. And if you're not, you should try and put yourself into those discussions. They're important to have, and they will impact some of the decisions that get made. So financial, right off the top, will I be more secure? The next question, how much is this going to cost? In public sector, this is OpEx. It's by and large OpEx. It doesn't have to be, but that's important. Capital dollars are generally easy to come by. Operating expenses are difficult. So there are reserved instances. And you should talk to your finance department and you should find out that if you do a 3-year upfront reserved instance that's convertible, can you treat that as a capital asset? If you can, you're not going to be able to avoid all of your operating expense, but you're going to get in there. And this affects your security budgets. This is a security tool. It's an indirect security tool, but if you don't have budget to run your program will falter and it will fall short. The billing console, create billing alarms, please. If you have an account, go in, create billing alarms, alarm early, alarm often. There's really no penalty to this, and you will know early on if you are mining Bitcoin somewhere or using some really cool GPU accelerated instances. There's some really, really cool stuff you can do with Amazon that costs a lot on the hourly basis. This is absolutely key. And then we had touched on CloudWatch. Part of the finances, as we go through this, as you evaluate your technical solutions, go out and look at third-party products. Look at the Amazon ones. There will be a delta in capability. So many of the Amazon's ones are simple, right? S3, simple service. You're getting 80% of the value for 20% of the features. That's awesome. Try and do that ROI on your security tool set. What it costs to make a dashboard in CloudWatch and have data going in and have that CloudWatch dashboard there is pennies on the dollar to a lot of proprietary solutions. And you'll have to have a business decision around, is that worth my effort to maintain dual stacks? Do I need to fold it into a single one? I know a lot of this probably sounds like more management accounting than security, but fundamentally underneath, your security program needs that business rationale, or it's going to have a hard time getting off the ground. Now there's architectural changes. I don't know, is anyone here familiar with the 6 R's? Gartner uses it, Amazon uses it. Not seeing a lot of hands. Okay, that's fine. 6 R's is basically, if you're going to change your architecture, there are 6 different paths you can take. And the 2 ones, the gray ones in that lower corner, they're retain or retire. So if I retire my service, well, that's one less problem today than I had yesterday, and that's wonderful. Retaining it, same problem, and it's going to be the same problem. And then across the top, you've got rehosting. That's your traditional lift and shift. That's pretty normal. So your security problems, whatever was inherent to the platform right there, you're carrying that along for the ride. And in some ways, you can have more granularity, but you're going to have to learn how to wrap your cloud tools around what you've already retained. If you replatform it, that traditionally, just think of a server 2012 to 2016 migration, something like that. You've replatformed it, so you've got a new platform and your existing apps. Repurchase. This one, I won't dwell on for too long, other than to say the vast majority of the time these days, when you go to repurchase an application, you are more likely than not going to end up on SaaS. Just that's the way of the world. The odds that you're presenting this in an on-premise scenario are low. So in your architecture though, what is your security posture around SaaS applications? How do you evaluate them? How do you integrate them into your existing security strategy? Do they have single sign-on? Do they have an audit trail within the application? Are those attributes synced up with your on-premise SIEM or your cloud SIEM? How do you know if your SaaS applications are being used and abused in a way that you don't want? I propose that you really need to understand the infrastructure and platform of a service and those attributes to make educated decisions about whether you're properly consuming SaaS or not. It's really easy to, oh, that's SaaS and I don't have to think about it. But if you as a customer can't make an educated understanding of your SaaS provider's competency, you are in for a rough security ride downstream. There's a lot of things that you cannot transfer accountability on, personal information being one of them. So the SaaS provider might not be able to indemnify you against a breach. And then there's refactoring, and that really is the nirvana of all cloud providers, getting to containers, getting to function as a service. Generally speaking, what I've observed in British Columbia, we are really on those top 2 arcs. We're rehosting and we're replatforming, and that I think is a pretty typical trajectory that a lot of people take. I do like refactoring though. The attack surface of a Lambda is effectively 0. It's got no permanent state. It's got very little in the way of memory. There are some cool attacks against it. People are popping shells against Lambda all the time, but even then they can't go anywhere. They're mostly getting to peek under the hood a tiny bit. Now, legal requirements. I'm not going to dwell on this too hard as a dive into law, because that's not why anyone came here, but I think the only way you can play a game is to know the rules of the game. So in British Columbia, public sector, we have FIPA, private sector, PIPA. Nationally, we've got our federal privacy law. Internationally, think of GDPR and things like that. You need to know the rules. And for security, compliance is generally part of security. And this is absolutely critical that you know the boundaries that you have to work within. If I unpack FIPA, it really has three pillars, and they all are mutually supporting, and they are all equally important to get the job done. There's administrative, physical, and technical approaches to performing security and making sure that you've closed the loop. So, Jordy had talked about the landing zone a little bit. This is part of a landing zone deployment. And this is really a best practice guide. If anyone came to me and said, well, how do you know you engineered your environment appropriately? I would say I took my vendor's best practices recommendations and put them into play. The landing zone covers everything from a security account, a logging account, shared services accounts, your federation, how you connect, how you build, how you manage all of these things. There are other angles on, I couldn't get all of the slides up and still really cover it all. It's comprehensive. And it's a little bit rare for Amazon to have such prescriptive guidance on how to do it right in the first place. This structure is a great way to build a safe space. I sometimes call this a bouncy castle. You can get in there, you can make a lot of noise, you're not going to break anything, and you're in a fairly contained setup that it's okay to iterate and experiment. He touched on Artifact. You had your NASCAR slide, Jordy, of all these different certifications. And that's great, but how do I know he's telling me the truth? He's got a pretty good poker face, and he might be lying to me. Artifact is actually the way that you can satisfy your internal legal counsel that you went and checked. And some of them are under NDA, and they're watermarked, and you need the latest version of Acrobat Reader, and it is the single cheapest and most effective way to get your internal legal counsel on side with what you're trying to do, and that from a security perspective, you understand what due diligence means, and that you're actually going deeper than just taking their word for it. Trust, but verify. It's really, really important to cover those sorts of things. Security is comprehensive. It's woven through all parts of the business. I think the landing zone is a really interesting approach. There are other ones for other cloud providers. At the end of the day, you really want to have vendor best practices in place. I think that's just a very safe position to start from. We talked about training a little bit. I actually want to dive in on certification. Training is important. Training is absolutely vital to, again, continue to know that you're demonstrating competency for security, for operations, for anything else. It is vital, but what's even better is getting certified. That's the equivalent of you're learning to drive or you have your driver's license. Only one of those two things actually makes you street legal. Now, in the long term, though, you're not just going to immediately certify your staff or your team or yourself overnight. It takes time. It does, and you have to learn and grow, and experience is only something you win with time. But there is a shortcut, and that is to find providers, service providers, and professional services who hold the certifications that you need to help you along the way. That is, you are allowed to drive on the road if you have a licensed driver sitting there and helping you along with it. It's the exact same approach here. So look for partners who have the security specialty, especially if you are going to tamper with something that's a regulated workload. So to level set a little bit, if you have dummy data and there's very low exposure on that, go crazy. Any region, any place, any time, any service. If you start dealing with controlled data, personal information and things like that, you had really better be sure that you've established a proper foundation for how you want to proceed. These are all absolutely solvable problems. There are no impediments to doing this, you just need to know where the trapdoors are. We had touched on DevOps, and I'll call it DevSecOps. I really do want security woven into DevOps. And what happens here, and Jordy had touched on this, you start building security in as a unit test in your pipeline. On code check-in, static code analysis is done, dynamic code analysis is done. Those green lights become the effective method as part of your code pipeline. Once security becomes a unit test, you are now starting to get towards a compliance. And compliance is code. And I don't mean checkbox compliance. I mean you actually have a continuous record that you were compliant all the time. To a certain extent, you have to shift left on security requirements. You're going to have to educate your developers, your application specialists. They have a responsibility. The trade-off, though, as we bring this in, we're doing a DevSecOps pipeline right now, I get out of the way. And everybody loves that. Nobody really wants to have to talk to me about security in the organization. They want me just off to one side. Would I please go away? And can they just do their job? Yes. I'm going to shift left some of those responsibilities. I'll have guardrails and checkpoints along the way, and we can move through. The holy grail of this is we can get to continuous deployment, which means not going through a heavy change management process, not waiting on our twice weekly change advisory board meetings. I want to speed up the pace of business. I want to speed up the pace of deployment. The only way I can do that is to lower risk. And the only way I can lower risk is to guarantee or have a high level of assurance in compliance and everything else. This gives accountability all the way down to the individual developer, and in return, with that accountability, they get all sorts of free rein. They get to go off leash. This is a great approach, and you should pursue it. So and I struggled to, was this administrative or was it technical? I think it is an administrative approach, but there's a lot of technical woven into it. So then I had said that there was an administrative pillar. There is a physical pillar. There is a physical pillar to cloud. So encrypt your data at rest. This is BitLocker for the cloud. BitLocker is generally when you've got PII on a laptop, one of the questions I will ask is, did it have BitLocker on it, and how do I know? Look at all the different entry points for encryption here. It's mind-boggling. You can encrypt all the things all the way through, and you never really have to stop. And a lot of it's on by default. There's Cloud HSM, KMS. Another one that I wanted to talk about, AWS Secrets Manager. You can automatically rotate service account passwords, other passwords. This is a really neat, efficient service to make sure that you're rotating secrets. If you're PCI compliant, you need to rotate your passwords on a set timer. This automates it. It makes it simple. There's another one called Parameter Store, which is kind of a cousin to Secrets Manager. There are so many options to make sure that your data is encrypted, that there is a smooth pathway to do it, and all these things write logs as well. So everything is logged. It's absolutely fantastic. So you've got data at rest, and then you have data in transit as well. And we've talked about Direct Connect. We've talked about what this looks like. And the last solution that Jordy put forward, where you have Direct Connect and you're running a VPN over that, that is the highest level of assurance. I've talked to lots of organizations that are simply running site-to-site VPN. That is really, it's a matter for you to present to higher management around risk acceptance and consequences. Site-to-site VPN can be adequate as a fallback in some cases, but you want to make sure that as a security practitioner, you're engaging other parts of the business and not just staying in your own silo. This is a collaborative effort, and you will have to participate and educate up and lead on some of these conversations. Direct Connect does have a Canadian data sovereign route. There is section 30.1 of our Privacy Act for public sector, FIPA, that does require Canadian data sovereignty. There are other providers out there, but you should actually ask, just like the how do you know with Artifact, how do you know that their route is sovereign? They have to make assurances around that, and they have to be willing to stand by them. You need to know their primary and their secondary routes. Does their south ring actually dip into the States under suboptimal network conditions? Data in transit is important. And then finally, there's the technical. And I mean, this is really where I would love to nerd out, but Jordy got all the good stuff, and you got to hear me for the last half of it. But the technical, this is amazing. So, get your situational awareness. This is partly logging, but logging is only one part of your situational awareness. You've got to get it. You have to store it. And there are so many options. The process and analytics, that it's just incredible what you can do. This could be Elastic MapReduce. This could be Elasticsearch. This could be Redshift. This could be running a service called Athena that allows you to make SQL queries against data stored in S3. Analytics is something I really enjoy. All sorts of ways to do it. There are ways to make your analytics process easier or harder. There's a format called Parquet. I would encourage you to look into Parquet. It will make a lot of the queries that you want to do against S3 significantly easier. They'll be optimized for a whole bunch of services. Now, converting data to Parquet, you can do that with something called Kinesis. There's all kinds of ways to make your analytics easier. S3 bucket lifecycles, rolling things to Glacier, mean that the cost of actually maintaining potentially forensic evidence one day go to near zero compared to what your traditional on-premise costs would look like. And then the visualization. And there's so many different open source, Amazon provided, and proprietary tools to do a visual analysis. I could spend all day on this. I won't. I think they've got a hook waiting in the wings for me. And then you need proactive and reactive controls. And the best thing about this is that you can actually link these things all back together. So we talked about config a little bit earlier. There's Shield and Shield Advanced, which is part of the more proactive devices and protections you can put out in front. There's Amazon Macy, which is super interesting. It takes the data you upload into S3 and runs machine learning against it, looking for personal information, looking for unusual patterns of access. Basically, there is a bit of a chicken and egg problem that I'm still trying to crack. I would love to put all my data in there so I could see where my PII is, but it's tricky to take that leap of faith and put all my PII into the cloud before I can tell you where all my PII is. This one, but the service itself has tremendous promise. Inspector. This would be very similar to running something like Nessus, Rapid7's tools. This is vulnerability analysis for your environment. And these things can then fire off remedies and remediations. You know, at the end of the day, what this means is that we can get a fully compliant lifecycle. We can get to compliance as code. We can get to security as code. We can start getting closer to automating incident response and building all sorts of really interesting tools on top of things. Don't get overwhelmed by the depth and breadth of services. You know, I lost count. I think it's around 125 services are live right now. When you want to get started with technical security, pick the core ones. Understand S3, EC2, the load balancers, the WAF. Get a landing zone. Build a few small toy deployments. Iterate. It's not failure, it's learning. It is learning a new tool. You didn't fail at playing the piano. You were learning to play the piano. This is the exact same approach. So you have to get in there. You have to get your hands dirty. There's only so much you can do by watching. And it's as you start doing and learning, the rest of this slide will stop looking like a sea of icons and you'll be able to read it like it was just text on a screen. You know, I'd like to thank you and Jordy and the rest of the Amazon team very much for giving me the opportunity to share what I've discovered so far. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks very much.